Welcome. I'm Cynthia Tam. Just welcome you to the workshop and a very brief intro of who I am. I was an occupational therapist for many years, and then I became a pastor, and now pastoring the Living Room Church, but also the National Coordinator for Disability Ministry for the Alliance, CNMA. And I'm also a student doing a study on disability theology with the focus on belonging. Okay, so what I want to do today is probably more theoretical and theological. I feel that skills are easier to pick up, and that if we get the theory right, then we know what we're doing, okay? So the first half of it, I'm just gonna paint a little bit of the Ontario disability landscape for you, talk about the concept of disability, what it means to be presuming competence, and then talk a bit about what I see as affirming presence in the three sides of it, and then we'll be a little bit more practical in terms of creating that environment, okay? So I hope to go through the first part of it pretty quickly and then get to some practical side of it. But to balance it, I have a handout here that's pretty much a resource list. And so I have all the practical tips that you need. As I said, the practical side of it is easier. So you find the resources, pretty much there are a lot of blueprints that you can follow. And Irene Jung has a workshop this afternoon that's possibly more practical as well. So I have the handout in an organization that I'm with that have information. We do serve churches and organizations. If you need training, we're more than happy to help. And then my contact information there, so please help yourself. And so to get started, let's talk a little bit about what disability in children looks like in Ontario. Now, the information might look old because it's 2006, and it's in fact based on 2001 census. And why is that? If you remember, in the time of Stephen Harper, we did not have the long form in our census. So the long form was only introduced last year, again. So we'll expect to see the report in a few years. So see, 2001 census, 2006 report, right? So unfortunately, this is the most recent information we have in Ontario or in Canada for that matter. As you can see, there are a wide variety of disabilities that we can see in children, and the number on the chart does not add up to 100. Why? Because there are multiple disabilities, and many, if not most, children that you would, that we might consider disabled, in fact, have multiple disabilities. The most common one, as you can see, is learning, chronic, they embedded a whole range of disabilities in it, from allergy all the way to cerebral palsy, spinal bifida, and so on. So the term chronic includes any disability that is expected to last 6 months and longer. Okay, so that's everything. And then you can see speech that is up there, development, and so on. So what I want you to take away from this slide is that the kids that you will see that you're concerned with having some disability might have multiple disabilities. And why is disability particularly concerning us? I want to suggest that because we are a church, we are a family of Christ, but there's also legal implication. How many of you know about this law? Not too many. Okay, so then you need to know. Because in Ontario, Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act has been a law since 2005. Okay, if you are particularly come from a larger church where you have more than 20 staff, including summer interns, okay, including temporary staff. then you need to actually been filing reports to the government. Actually, you should have filed at least 2 reports. Now today we won't have time to go into the AODA, but just for your information, if you wanted to take my contact so that I could email you the information, I'm a part of a network. Irene Jung will be speaking in the afternoon in it too, of churches who are doing something with disabilities. And our network is going to be doing a conference beginning of next year on AODA. Okay? So if you want me to send you the information in case you don't get it somewhere else, get my info and I'll send that to you. Okay, so what is disability? That sounds like a question that you might think, why am I asking? Or do you think disability is a very well-defined term? Anybody will even say that you are normal or typical? No, right? I only know of one who is able, who's God. Other than him, I do not know anybody who is totally able and is quote-unquote normal. If you have done any statistic courses, you know normal is a normal curve. So what we usually see or consider as normal is within whatever brackets on that normal curve that we defined. And anything out of it, we said is quote-unquote abnormal. So John Swinton, who is a disability theologian, say that disability is a label that indicates the person is marginalized. Nothing more. You think about that, I have disability that you don't see, right? And there are people, Einstein, for example, people believe that he has some kind of Asperger's. You can prove it. But it indicates that there is such a whole range of abilities that we might actually be better talking about differences. And if we're talking about differences, I'm sure for all of us in this room, we're all different in different ways. We're gifted in different ways, we're limited in different ways. So when we think about disability that way, then disability is a term that doesn't really carry any meaning. How is it that a person with physical limitation and a person with mental illness and a person with blindness and a senior with low vision, they are all disabled in different terms? So who is disabled, right? So if we think about disability that way, then it helps us to think about what we are affirming. Then obviously it's a gift. And we would expect to see gift in every person because that's what the Bible tells us, right? In 1 Corinthians 12, each one is given a gift. And so that is what we really want to affirm. I just want to illustrate the ideas of disability further with autism. Probably a diagnosis that we, in some sense, have fear. Would that be correct to say? Because it is something that is even less understood among all the other disabilities. When you can see somebody in a wheelchair, it's easy to see. Autism is formally called the autistic spectrum disorder, suggests a wide spectrum of it. In the higher spectrum, you might have heard about the name Temple Grandin. Anybody? No? Okay. Temple Grandin is a scientist and is a professor. But she is also a very strong advocate for autism because she has autism. And yet she is a professor. Okay? So that right away tell you in the spectrum there is very high abilities. And at the other spectrum, we'll say severe, profound, whatever. And what do we understand about them? How do we see them? That's why I want to tell you Kali's story. Yeah, so how's Kali disabled? So if you, first of all, if you want to know more Kali's story, on YouTube, just search Kali's voice. You can see her TV talk show, actually quite interesting. So if you notice in the video, when Kali was young, if among you, you might have students with autism that look familiar, right? And so I want you to keep that image in mind when you're working with those kids that looked so autistic that sometimes it make us wonder what they can do in the future. Remember Kali. And just wonder what and how. Remember the 5 W that we just been told this morning, to think about how we can work with our next generation and what we can really do with them to help them understand their gifts and be a member of the body of Christ. The reason why I bring this story up is to really want us to think deeper on why we need a label. A label is sometimes helpful, right? No doubt about it. Even if you're working with kids in younger ages, you might actually have that struggle with some families who do not want a label, correct? Because we get to the family side of it. To actually receive a label is not easy. And yet in Ontario, getting a label is the way to access services. So there is a reason to do it. But what we need to be mindful of is what the label might do to actually instill a social exclusion. Before you know anything about autism, I wonder what the word autism might bring to your mind. Why is it that the word autism quite often instills fear? I think quite commonly the people that I work with, when they think about autism, they think about behavior. Behavior that's difficult to control, violent behavior, aggression that we don't know how to deal with, communication problem, we don't know how to talk with them. They seem to be turning away from us. Why is that? And a lot of that is coming from the stigma. There's a lot of stigma related to different disabilities, not just autism. Think about cerebral palsy. You might just think about somebody in a wheelchair, somebody who has difficulty controlling their bodies. And yet, some people with cerebral palsy are not noticeable in terms of their physical disabilities. So in any disability, if I could suggest, there is a spectrum. Even for mental illness, for intellectual disability, the label itself does not tell you anything. You need to go beyond the label and really know the person. And that's when you can know what are the limitations and what might be the gifts that you can actually explore and develop. So that's what I want to encourage you to do. And the last question, the reason why I put it there, the what and why we need it for, is particular to our ministry environment. And I really want you to think about that, because we're not providing healthcare. We're not doing education services in terms of, teaching them from Monday to Friday. We might have them an hour or two on Sunday. Okay? So what are we needing that label for? And how would that help us? And how would that limit us? Is what I really want us to be thinking about this morning. Douglas Bicklin is an educator, and he's been working on understanding the gifts, although he doesn't use that word because it's from more the social education side of things, but the abilities and of people with very significant labels that often describe intellectual disabilities. Okay? And especially autism. He's written a book with his ethnographic studies with a whole bunch of people with autism. And so from his study, what he is urging us to think about is this idea of presumed competence. He said, by presuming competence, educators place the burden on themselves to come up with ever more creative, innovative ways for individuals to learn. The question is no longer who can be included or who can learn, but how can we achieve inclusive education? We begin by presuming competence. How's that related to labeling or stigma? If we are thinking about a child with autism, and we think automatically that the person might have difficulty with communication, who might not even want to be with other people, we assume that we need to have different ways of communicating with them. We assume that they actually may not be able to learn. All those assumptions could have come from a label. And oftentimes, because the word stigma indicate oftentimes is related to negative images. And very often in the education system, that's where Bicklin works from, right? The regular school system is presumed incompetence. If you have worked with kids with disabilities, you know, the families will tell you, they may be placed in a schoolroom that the family might not agree because the teacher is not teaching the kids anything. You ever heard that? Some of you? Yeah. Because sometimes even our educations will operate on presumed incompetence. Whereas Bicklin is trying to say from his study, where people with often considered significant intellectual disability, he sees their abilities. There's a couple of individuals now who are, if you know the autism literature, you will know. There's an Indian guy, Tito, who's written a couple of books. One of them is Mind Tree. And in there, they talk about their experience with significant autism. They're all nonverbal. Okay? And yet, the fact that they could write books tell you that somehow they learn. I have a friend who has a friend with an adult with autism. And this family's they live in a rural area. So if they need to go to a certain family functions, funeral and weddings, they often don't take this young man. And one day they found out that there was a wedding. They went to it. And then when they got home, this young man threw a huge tantrum. They didn't understand it initially. And then they found out that the wedding invitation was on the table. And he might have read it. They never knew this young man could read. And so thought it might be a coincidence. And the second time was a funeral. And again, they left this young man home. And when they came home, same thing. And this guy was very, very sad because he knew someone that they loved passed away. You never know. There's just, autistic mind is particularly intriguing to me. That's where my PhD study is on. That's why you hear me talk a lot about more autism for that reason. you don't understand. We don't understand autism at all. What they understand, what they know, we don't know. So the only way to approach is this approach of presumed competence. And recognizing that when we have difficulty communication, then we'll have to ask ourselves, is the communication problem mine or his or hers? If he and she is trying to communicate to me and I don't understand, maybe I need to try harder. Okay? So this is my model, so to speak. In terms of talking about affirming presence, I learned that there are the three sides of it: the church, the families, and the children. And I'm going to begin with us, with the church. I do believe that all of us as children of God and followers of Christ, we come into children ministry because we love children, right? Obviously, that is our motivator to serve, and I have no doubt about it. I talk a little bit about fear, and oftentimes it's the fear that inhibits us. When we see someone coming with a disability, the first reaction might be, hold on, I don't know what to do. Maybe you shouldn't come here. Maybe you should go down to that bigger church down the street who has more resources, because I don't know what to do with you. Okay? It's unfortunately a very common story, I tell you. Our organization works with families with children with special needs. It is unfortunately that the impressions that they might take away, and the statistics show that over 80% of people with disabilities are not in church. Why? I think there's two sides of it, and that, well, maybe three, since my model have three. The person himself with disability, us, and the families all need to recognize that we need the church, because the body of Christ is established by Christ for us to come together as one, right? So remember what John said, there is no fear in love. When we love, by the grace of God, by the power of the Spirit, we'll find a way around it, working on the principle, the presumed competence, to find a way to communicate, to find a way to teach. When we are working towards having kids in our church, one word that is very often used, not that it's wrong, but we need to think about the meaning of it, is the word inclusion. To be included, like you're all included because you are sitting here. To belong is a different story. When we open our door and have people come into our churches, to our programs, they can sit there and nobody actually talk to them. Or they could be a part of our children's ministry, and a common comment again from a lot of the families, they never get invited to a birthday party. In that sense, they kind of sitting there, but nobody talk to them, then they are not belonging. So the both in the social science and in disability theology, we're beginning to think about from inclusion to belonging, and look at it from that angle to think about what it means. So Heinz Reinders is a person who's working on behalf of people with very significant intellectual disabilities. Oftentimes we said they're in the vegetable stage. And so he has been thinking about what it means to be human if we happen to be in that state. Are we still human? And this is what he said. The practices and politics of inclusion will not create a lasting change for persons with disabilities. Because as I said, we can include them, open the door, let them sit in. But unless there will be people willing to invest in friendship with them, without true friendship, disabled person will enjoy the new opportunities created by the equal rights, most likely as strangers in a strange land. Church is a strange land. You think about a lot of kids with disabilities. If I don't use autism as an example even, think about kids because of their disability are more fixed to their routines. Kids with ADHD would be one, right? They need a lot of transitions, don't they? And so they're more used to Monday to Friday going to school, and Sunday it's a very different routine. Okay? So recognize that the space that we're actually offering to them is a strange place. And how can we help them to see that strange place and not so strange? We'll need the friendship. We need friends who are there to really receive them as friends and not see them as strangers. So that's the difference between inclusion and belonging. Okay, moving on to talk about the kids. One word that often comes, as I said, a lot of young people with disabilities, even with severe autism, are writing about their experience, either in blogs or in books. And one word that you can almost guarantee to find is this word, loneliness. Disability is a very lonely experience. They often felt misunderstood because nobody knows their experience. When a child with autism is having a meltdown, we think that's behavior. But perhaps he's actually dealing with something. Maybe the environment is too noisy and they're having a sensory overload. Maybe there's actually internal difficulty, a gastric problem or whatever. And then they don't know how to communicate to us. And when it's not understood, you get a meltdown. And when they're actually able to communicate, we think they are just misbehaving, they're not supported. And oftentimes they ignore. They may be sitting in a corner doing nothing. And none of the kids is actually interacting with them. And the worst is rejection. It's not uncommon for kids with disability of all kinds to be bullied and teased. And we need to be particularly concerned about that, I believe. Because if we are teaching our kids in Sunday school, I think we really need to teach them to love. And so those behaviors is something that we really need to be mindful of. This is from a young woman with the experience of ADHD. So she's already a grown-up. So reading what she wrote on Psychology Today is helpful for us to know that even going through the childhood, getting to adulthood, the loneliness, the ongoing struggle is still here. She said, now you vow to fight on and try harder. And that is true. You have to try very hard to fit in oftentimes, because that is the expectation. Because you know that deep in your heart, you are a loving person who wants to contribute and share in the bounties of that others seem to enjoy so easily. You so desperately want to please others and be accepted, but you live in a secret world of shame and self-loathing. You begin to believe that there really is something wrong with you and that you must be a bad person, a young adult. Okay? So note that our kids growing up would have a very low self-identity. In the school system, they are rejected, ignored, as we said. They're dealing with it every day. And so if we say that we are fearful, they're even more fearful. They fear to be rejected, and worse, to be bullied. They're very, very insecure. And when a child is insecure, we also know where behavior could come from, right? So the ideas of shame is always there, and you always doubt yourself, right? When people are not accepting you, even for ourselves, you always doubt yourself, thinking, what's wrong with me? And that's what she's talking about. And you begin to step up your efforts to cover your tracks so that you can show your loved one that you care. The problem is that you're being judged as a normal person, and people are beginning to only see you for your failures. And that further compounding the ugly feelings bring to the table life's confusions of careers, family responsibility, finances, and so on. There's a no-win situation. So as our children grow up, they're going to deal with more and more issues. If they're in quote-unquote normal classroom, they have to compete with their friends. It's trying to get into that inner world of a child growing up with disability is what I want to impress you. So how are we going to turn that around to look at competence? Second video. So what the mom was trying to describe is they actually have two kids. One have ADHD, the other ADHD and Asperger's. George has ADHD and Asperger's. And mom was trying to say when he was young, jumping off the wall, both of them, right? They have the trampoline in the backyard, trying to just work off the energy, and then focus on what they're good at. You know, the video, the music, and just really focus on developing the gift. And when the kids found something that they're really good at, their energy is channeled, and they become successful. That's what the story that you unfortunately didn't hear a lot. One thing I want to leave with you, and then we'll move on to the family, is the kid. I talk about their fear for rejection. And what is necessary for us is to create a welcoming community that are intentionally creating friendship with them. What about the family? Loneliness again comes up as a really major theme. Families, when they find out that their child has a disability, the first reaction is like grieving, denial. And then when they eventually come to accept it, they find sometimes that because of the stigma, that affects themselves. You know, when you have a child with autism, you would really think about what might happen to the child. What may happen to me? It's going to life of caregiving that seems to be hopeless, because that's what the world is telling us, right? So they very oftentimes they will withdraw from friends, because when they go out to a party, when the kids are climbing off the wall, you don't feel good, right? You feel bad about your own parenting. You doubt yourself. And so you shut yourself off. Or after one or two times, your friends stop inviting you to the party. The end result is that same loneliness, the isolation. But what is thrown into that picture, interestingly, is the idea of love. So what the mom was trying to say is talking about she and all other mothers, when they have a child, the feeling is the same. A precious child is just a precious gift, right? Until 2 or 3 years, there's mothers of autism, until they're diagnosed, then they would be thrown into a different world. Her word, you go to a library, but you find out that you're going to a different part of the library. When your friends are telling you, my 2 years old today is doing such and such, you don't even want to know. She says she oftentimes wants to delete the blog, delete the Facebook message, because it's painful. So a family is dealing with all those things, but at the same time, very, very interestingly, all I would say, I was going to say most, families that I know, at the end really feel the very special blessing of disability. And I think that is something that we need to take note of. People who actually spend time with a person with disabilities will be changed profoundly. We do not understand how and why. I work with this organization called Village Yoga, and every year we depend on volunteers. Same story as yours. And what we do at the summer camp is we join a volunteer hip to hip with a child for 4 days. And at the end of it, their lives change totally. They feel the presence of God in the person with disability, in the love, unconditional love of the parents. It's something that I'm still struggling to find words to describe, but that often lead me to think, to reflect. There is a special reason why God brings disability. I don't know if you know the name John Bernier. Yes? Not too many. What about Henry Nouwen? No? Okay. So these two people with this international organization called LASH, and they are intentional communities living with people with disabilities. And so both of them gave up their academic career and go and live with them. And at the end, Henry Nouwen wrote a book called Adam. And it is, in his mind, a framing of the gospel story. And Adam is the person that he took care of for many years until Adam passed away. In the time that Henry Nouwen spent with Adam, he relearned the gospel story, the love of Christ, very deeply in the daily, mundane care of Adam, in bathing him, in feeding him. He meets Christ, which is not surprising, right? Matthew 25, that's where we learned that when we are giving water to the thirsty, we are actually giving it to Christ. So it is that encounter that is very mystical, I would say, that is for us to consider. Okay, creating that environment. So I started with us as a church. I'm starting with us again. I think we need to affirm ourselves, right? We need to feel confident going in, okay? And we talked about the fear. So learn about that fear and recognize the fear that is in you. But also recognize the love of Christ that really conquer anything and everything that's also in you. Know that who you are is important. I started by earlier saying that think about what we do with the kids with disabilities. We're not education in the sense of regular education. We want them to, again, back to our keynote, what we want them to know is God. And how do we get them to know God is a challenge for us. So I challenge you to really think about who we are as a family in Christ. Sometimes we fear we don't know how to take care of them because we think we need to be that profession. And I tell you, to be an occupational therapist, you need a bachelor degree and a master's degree, and a PhD entry is coming. So, obviously, not everyone is going to be an occupational therapist here, right? And do you need to be? No. If you think about yourself as a family, and then you think about how the family members of a child with disability take care of him or her. Think about grandmother, grandfather, uncle, aunties. How do they learn? By spending time with the kid, right? Just with any other kid. You spend time and you learn their temperament. You learn what they like. You learn what they don't like. And you learn to love them. Same thing. You really think about yourself as a family. Then you learn from the parents and you learn from the kid what it means to be a family for them. I really urge you to think about yourself not as a service organization. And in our days, I know some families expect us to be. So when we get to the family side, that is something that you need to have a good discussion with your family for. Okay? Tell them who you are. And tell them what you want them to be. Now, but I don't mean to say that you don't need to know anything about disability. That wouldn't be right? That's why you're here. But I urge you to think about the parents as experts, right? They know their kids the best. So work with the family and learn how their kids learn the best. And there are tons of resources. There's one here for you. And as I said, if you don't have anybody that you know that who could do some training with you, our organizations will be more than happy to help. And there are other many training opportunities there. Today's one, right? Affirming the family. Remember, when we talk about the family, what they go through, loneliness, fear. They're not certain about what and who they will be dealing with and how they're going to be received. Okay? And so just really have a good sit-down talk with them. Show them that you really love them. You want to be a family, but you need help. You're not an expert. But you're willing to work with them to find out how to make it work. And if you search some disability theology literature, you'll find a lot of stories written by ministers and families working together and how it worked out for them. And with the families, then you have to recognize that you don't know anything about the child, right? So humility is a Christian virtue to start with. Have that attitude going in to talk with the parents, find out the child, find out how they interact, and I'm redundant, but saying it again, working together is the way to really find out. The child, really, a child with disability is been rejected, ignored. They experience a lot of negative things in the world. So when they come to you, they have the same fear, if not more, because you're a stranger the first time, right? And as we said, it's a strange place that they don't know. So how can you affirm the child with your love? You have to make them feel welcome. If there's anything that the child's doing now, when they're in a strange environment, they are quite possibly going to have some behaviors. Okay? So if our reactions is right away the judgment one, it's really hard to develop the rapport. Try to see how you can work with the families, carry an attitude of humility and non-judgmental approach. And the child can feel it, right? We know, we work with kids. We know that if the child knows that you love him, he feel it, right? And so operate from that. It carries you a long way. And then realistically, we need to think about placement. So I want to talk a little bit about this word integration. Integration is throwing every kid, no matter what abilities, into the same classroom. It is a good principle if the child can, but integration doesn't work unless we have support. Okay? And we all know recruiting volunteers these days is not easy. Okay? So think about it and think about what alternative there might be. And remember, don't make that decision on your own. Work with the family, work with the family, work with the family. Okay? The family might help you find someone they know as a volunteer. The family will help you to work with the child better, then maybe you can cope. We don't know. Just have that as an open option. Talk with the family. Yes, but when necessary, you can work out with the family how the work to be, have a pull-out room. It might not be bad when we get to the environment to think about a quieter environment for pull-out, a quiet time, or a segregate approach. Some churches do run special needs Sunday school. And you might know about friendship ministry. And those things are options as well. And obviously, we need to think about the age, and it's important. I have had known kids who are teenagers who are being thrown to a kindergarten in the Sunday school because that's their developmental age, supposedly. Okay? But that really doesn't do the kid any good. So they might have some intellectual disability, but developmentally, still the teenager. Classroom design. How many of you have an orange classroom, yellow, bright color murals all over the place? No? Good. I've seen that too much. But if you have rooms painted in color, filled with murals, you're asking for trouble. You really need something that's visually less stimulating. You need to really control what posters, what information you are posting. Make sure that the visuals are easy to see, to declutter, to make sure that kids don't get to the areas and things too easily. Okay? And really control the noise is important. Any of those things are important, but I would still stress an emotionally safe environment is the most important. Kids need to feel safe. They need to feel loved. They need to feel secure. Start from ourselves. We'll establish that routines and help them with the transition. We know that. As children minister that. I know you know that. But know that you yourself is the most important person that help other kids along, modeling. Right? How you love this child, how you communicate with the child is important. Show your love, show your respect, and work out how you can understand the child. If the child's having a bad day, having a meltdown, to say to them, I know that you're probably having a bad day. It's okay. We can go to a quiet corner, just quiet down for a little bit, and we can talk. Right? to show that you understand they're having a bad time instead of having a bad behavior. Okay? And so give the child a sense of control. Let the child know that if they are feeling frustrated, they can let you know. They can ask to go out. For ADHD kid, really can stand still. It's okay for them to go out and run around the hallway 10 times and come back. Okay, let the child have that control. Last slide. It's important to include other kids in the classroom to help. Some Sunday school would do orientation at the beginning of the school year. That would be the best time to teach other kids. And some rehab centers actually equip their kids to talk by themselves. So find out from the families how that is best done. Maybe the parents can come in and talk. Maybe the kids can talk themselves and show other kids what their needs might be and what kind of person they are really. It still can show they give their love to the other kids. Okay, I stop here. I can see I might have 2 minutes for question.